I'm Maya Torres. I'm 37 years old. My aunt always said I was quiet, too quiet for my own good. My parents, well, they didn't notice me much. My brother Daniel and my sister Rachel, they had the spotlight. I was invisible even in my own family. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, in a big house. Big enough that sometimes I feel like I'm the only person in it. I have everything I ever wanted: a successful company, money I don't have to count, a car collection, and a dog who thinks I'm his entire world. And yet, when I think about my life, I can't forget the way it started. I was born in a small Texas town. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and gossip travels faster than the wind. I was the youngest of three. Being last I thought would be easy. I imagined cuddles, attention, and bedtime stories. Instead, it meant being overlooked, always. Daniel was good at football. Rachel was beautiful, smart, and obedient. And me? I was quiet, curious, and always trying to figure out why I was so unnoticed. I remember my 11th birthday. I had planned a small party in the backyard. I invited a few classmates. I wanted balloons, cake, laughter, simple things. But my parents canceled it. Why? Daniel had a football game, his trophy match. That was more important than my smile. Rachel, of course, got a new bike that day. I got nothing. My cake sat lonely in the kitchen while my family cheered someone else. I learned early that I could not count on them. My only light was my grandfather. Luis. He saw me, really saw me. He had a crooked smile and gentle eyes that always seemed to say, "I know who you really are." When my parents ignored my school projects, he applauded. When I stayed up late assembling a model rocket, he stayed up too, helping me. He secretly gave me science kits, books, puzzles, things that fed my mind and curiosity. I would spend hours on experiments, feeling a quiet thrill every time I got it right. It was my grandfather who taught me how to be patient. Not the boring kind of patience adults talk about, but the sharp, quiet kind that waits and watches. He never told me to be like Daniel or Rachel. He never said I needed to be loud or beautiful. He said, "You will find your way, and when you do, make it yours." I carried his words like a shield. Even as a child, I noticed my parents' small cruelties. They would correct my words in front of friends. They would dismiss my questions as silly. They had favorites, and it was not me. I remember a school competition I entered for the science fair. I built a working model of a water filtration system. I stayed up nights scribbling notes, testing ideas. When I won, my parents barely looked at the ribbon. Daniel got a high five for scoring a touchdown. Rachel's drawing was displayed on the fridge. Mine was tucked into a drawer. I felt a quiet fire grow inside me then, a small strategic fire. If they wouldn't notice me, I would notice myself. If they wouldn't applaud me, I would learn to applaud myself. I started keeping journals. Not for anyone to read, not even my grandfather. I wrote down my feelings, the small injustices and the tiny victories. I tracked every slight, every ignored achievement, every humiliation. I imagined one day I would be seen, not for being loud, or pretty, or popular, but for being me. And if anyone doubted me, they would regret it. Even at 11, I was already learning to be invisible and powerful at the same time. I learned to smile when ignored, to nod when dismissed, to hide my frustration behind quiet determination. My grandfather would wink at me sometimes, as if he knew, "They can't touch your mind, Maya, they can't touch your fire." I remember sneaking my science kit under the bed one night. I was testing a small homemade battery. Sparks flew and I almost burned my notebook. I laughed to myself. Daniel was sleeping. Rachel was reading. My parents were arguing over something meaningless. I felt alive. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need them to celebrate me. I had myself, and one day I would have more than just trophies in drawers. I would have power. Even now, I can recall the scent of my grandfather's old study books, leather, a faint hint of tobacco. He had a way of making me feel like I mattered, like I was important. In that room I planned little victories. I imagined my life 15 years ahead, and even then I could see myself standing tall, no one able to question my worth. Those early years taught me three things. People will not notice you unless you make them. Being ignored is not weakness, it is opportunity. Every small slight, every overlooked success, every humiliation is a seed. And seeds, with patience, grow into forests. I still remember the day I returned to Texas. It wasn't a happy trip. It was funeral gray and cold. My grandfather Luis had passed. He had been my anchor, my secret supporter, the one person who believed in me even when the rest of the world didn't. And now, he was gone. I drove past the familiar streets, past the small houses where my neighbors used to laugh at my experiments, past the school playground where Daniel had scored touchdown after touchdown. Everything felt smaller, emptier. My heart tightened. I was 24 now, fresh out of MIT, with degrees in computer science and engineering, and yet I felt helpless. At the funeral, my parents were themselves. Daniel looked bored, Rachel looked perfect, and my mother wore a smile too tight to be real. My father barely looked at me. I realized immediately that they were not here to mourn. They were here to watch, to judge, to make sure I fit their idea of their perfect little family. The church smelled of flowers and old wood. People whispered condolences. I hugged friends, distant relatives, anyone who would let me feel a little warmth. But when it was over, and we gathered in my grandfather's house for the will reading, the atmosphere became cold. My mother cleared her throat. "Maya, your grandfather loved you, of course," she said, her voice saccharine, "but there are some things you need to know." I froze. Something in her tone didn't sound right. And then it happened. I am adopted. My parents framed it as some kind of favor they did for me. "We saved you," my father said, smiling like he was giving me a gift. "You should be grateful. We gave you a home, food, education." I stared at them. My chest tightened. My mind screamed, but my voice didn't come. I felt fury, cold, slicing, uncontrollable. Every injustice, every birthday ignored, every trophy hidden, every smile I had earned but never received. It all boiled into one sharp realization. My entire life had been a lie, and they had orchestrated it. I don't remember how long I sat there before standing. I left my parents and siblings staring at me like I was crazy. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just walked out. I cut all ties. They were no longer my family. Not by blood, not by love, not by loyalty. I took only a few things: my grandfather's ring, some journals, a couple of photographs, and the letters he had left me. Every scrap of paper that showed the truth. Every document that revealed favoritism, manipulation, and lies. I didn't destroy it. I didn't need to. One day, I would use it. That night, alone in a cheap motel, I wrote everything. I wrote my anger. I wrote my pain. I wrote my plan. I called it my ledger, mental and written, a record of every slight, every humiliation, every betrayal. Each entry was a seed, and I already knew I would water them carefully, slowly, patiently, coldly. I didn't just cry that night. I calculated. I planned. I imagined walking past them years later, successful, untouchable, while they would crumble under their own greed and stupidity. I imagined their faces when they realized they had ignored the one person who could surpass them in every way. I imagined a life where I was in control, and they were nothing. I left town quietly. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. My grandfather had given me the courage, and now I had the fire. Arizona became my new home. A tiny apartment, $3,000 in my pocket, and a mind sharpened like a blade. I slept little. I ate less. I studied more. I learned everything I could about computers, finance, and the hidden strings that controlled the world. And every night I opened my journals. I read the letters my parents had sent, the notes my grandfather had given me. Every photograph where I could see my own shadow in the background while Daniel and Rachel smiled at the camera. I memorized their faces, their words, their lies. I didn't hate them blindly. I hated them with precision, with a strategy. I made a promise to myself. One day I would return. Not as a scared little girl, not as the invisible child they ignored. I would return as someone they could never touch, never control, never humiliate. And when that day came, every slight, every betrayal, every unfair birthday and unacknowledged achievement would be paid back. Slowly, carefully, coldly. I didn't know when it would happen. I didn't know how. But I knew one thing. My life was mine now, and I was ready to take it. And I knew with absolute certainty that when that day came, they would see it coming too late. The night after I left my parents' house for the last time, I sat on the bus heading west. The lights of the city blurred into streaks, and the hum of the engine felt like a heartbeat syncing with mine. I didn't cry. Not anymore. There was only clarity, and underneath it, a quiet, burning resolve. I would build a life so untouchable, so complete, that no one could ever mock, betray, or control me again. I arrived in Arizona with my grandfather's ring in my pocket, a suitcase of clothes, and $3,000 to my name. That was it. Nothing else. My apartment was a tiny studio with cracked walls and a floor that creaked under every step. It smelled faintly of dust and old paint. But I didn't care. It was mine, and that was enough. I unpacked slowly, carefully, like I was claiming this small corner of the world for myself. The first weeks were the hardest. I worked 3 jobs: morning shifts at a diner, evening shifts cleaning offices, and nights tutoring kids in math and science. I barely slept, my body aching from exhaustion, but I refused to give in. I told myself every hour of hard work was a step away from the girl who had been invisible, ignored, and betrayed. Every coin earned was a brick in the foundation of the life I was building. At night, after the city quieted and the world seemed to pause, I would sit at my tiny desk and study. Programming, first, cybersecurity next, then finance and business strategy. I taught myself everything: tutorials, books, online courses. I absorbed it all. Slowly, my anger and grief turned into discipline and focus. Every failure became a lesson, every small victory a reason to keep going. I remember one night in particular. I had been trying to crack a simple program for hours. The code refused to work. I slammed the laptop shut, tears burning my eyes, frustration clawing at my chest. But then I breathed. I opened it again. I typed, deleted, rewrote, debugged. Hours later, the program ran perfectly. I leaned back, exhausted, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. I had done it on my own. I had built something from nothing. Years passed in this rhythm: work, study, failures, small victories. I began saving, slowly, methodically. By the 5th year, I was ready to start my own small company. A cybersecurity firm. I called it Sentinel Shield. At first it was just me and 2 other employees I trusted. We took small clients, solved their problems, and grew slowly. But growth brought power, and with power came security. I was no longer the helpless girl who had been abandoned and manipulated. I was building something untouchable. Even as my company grew, I never forgot my parents. Quietly, through private investigators, I learned what became of them. Their wealth had vanished. Daniel struggled in dead-end jobs. Rachel's perfect facade hid failures no one else knew. It was satisfying, but it was not yet time. I didn't want revenge through their suffering alone. I wanted it calculated, complete, undeniable. I was preparing, observing, planning. By the 10th year, Sentinel Shield had become a billion-dollar company. I had employees, offices, and influence. I funded scholarships, supported underprivileged youth, and created programs for girls to learn coding and cybersecurity. Outwardly, I was a successful, generous woman, but inwardly I was a strategist, a cold mind keeping a ledger of every wrong, every betrayal, every slight. The day of reckoning for my family would come. And when it did, they would see it coming too late. I looked in the mirror that night, alone in my office. The reflection staring back at me was not the little girl who cried alone in her grandfather's funeral. That girl was gone. The woman in the mirror was sharp, untouchable, and patient. She had power, wealth, intelligence, and resolve. Most importantly, she had time, and revenge was best served perfectly. I never thought I'd see them again. Not really. Not after all those years of silence, of carefully keeping myself untouchable. And yet, that morning, my security system blinked with a small, insignificant red light that would change everything. Front gate alert. I froze for a moment, heart beating, and then I recognized them: my parents. Daniel, Rachel, all standing there looking smaller than I remembered, weary, desperate. Their suits were ill-fitting, their polished smiles strained, and in their eyes I saw the same fear I had carried as a child: the realization that I were untouchable. I didn't answer immediately. I watched them from the second-floor window of my Scottsdale home, a cup of untouched coffee in my hand. I let the silence stretch. Let them feel the weight of being the ones outside, the ones asking, the ones powerless. Then I walked downstairs. Slowly. Deliberately, I opened the door and said nothing at first. They looked at me, Surprised as if expecting a scowl, a scream or a scene, instead they found calm. A polite practiced calm that hid every ounce of the storm inside me. My parents, I said finally, voice smooth. And Daniel. Rachel. What a surprise. Daniel cleared his throat. Maya, we're in trouble. We need your help. Just a loan, nothing more. 2 million, please. I held up a hand. Sit. Let's talk. Lunch, upstairs or downstairs? The look on their faces was priceless. Shock, confusion, disbelief. Lunch? They expected judgment, not hospitality. And I was going to give them hospitality, on my terms. I led them to the dining room. White tablecloth, silverware polished, candles lit. A meal that cost more than they had made in years was laid before them. Lobster, truffle pasta, rare wine. They hesitated, fingers trembling slightly over the silverware, unsure how to act. I smiled faintly. You're uncomfortable, I said softly. You've never been in a place like this, but it's fine, let's enjoy it. They ate, they stumbled over polite conversation, trying to hide shame with words that sounded hollow, and I observed. Every glance, every nervous laugh, every tiny panic flickering across their faces. I made mental notes. Every small detail was part of a larger picture. Their greed, incompetence, and desperation were all visible, and I recorded it all quietly in my mind, and secretly in the recordings I had set up around the house. After dessert, I leaned back in my chair. You know, I said slowly, I never forgot anything. Every word, every look, every dismissal, and I've kept track. Their faces blanched. Daniel stammered. Rachel's hand gripped the table edge. I know about the letters, the emails, the lies you told, the favors you claimed to do, the betrayals you hid. I've saved it all, every bit of it, and I know exactly what you're planning. A bead of sweat slid down my father's temple. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing to say. I will help the children, I continued, voice even unwavering, but nothing for you. Nothing. Not the inheritance. Not a cent for your schemes. You see, I choose my family, and my family doesn't include those who tried to destroy me. Their eyes widened. Shock, disbelief, shame, mixed with a faint grudging respect, though they would never admit it. And then came the subtle legal trap I had built over the years, seated quietly while appearing generous. Every attempt to manipulate, to deceive, even to breathe dishonestly in my house triggered penalties I had planted in contracts disguised as routine agreements. Their actions, once intended to control me, now reinforced my power. They had no idea they were walking directly into the web I had woven. By the end of the day they were exhausted, humiliated in ways they could not yet fully comprehend. I had been gentle, even kind on the surface. Yet every word, every smile, every gesture reinforced their defeat. I could have shouted, screamed, or ruined them publicly, but patience and control were far more satisfying. As they left, I waved politely. Safe travels. And remember, I will always know what you do, even when I'm not watching. I closed the door and leaned against it. The quiet house seemed almost alive, echoing with possibilities. I allowed myself a small, private smile. This was just the beginning. Their return had given me the chance to play the game on my terms. And I was always 3 moves ahead. I sat at my desk, reviewing the recordings and documents I had gathered over the years. Each conversation, each interaction, every word they spoke against me would become a tool. Not yet released, not yet revealed, but perfectly ready. Revenge wasn't about money. Not really. It was about control, exposure, and letting them feel. Finally, the same helplessness I had felt for years. And now, I held the deck. Every card, every move, every piece of the past turned into a weapon. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth spread through me. Outside, the Arizona sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert gold. And in that golden glow, I felt power. Calm, calculated, unstoppable power. The game had begun, and they didn't even know the rules yet. I closed the door behind them and listened to the faint crunch of tires on the driveway. They were gone, but the echoes of their presence lingered, like ghosts scratching at old wounds. I sat in silence for a long moment, letting the quiet settle over my house, over my life, over the years of careful preparation. I knew what had to happen next. Revenge wasn't simply about their humiliation at my table. That was only the first move. The real game, the one I had spent decades planning, was about exposing the rot beneath their perfectly polished lies, the greed and moral bankruptcy they had carried for years. I leaned back in my chair and opened my laptop. The recordings from today's visit, combined with letters, emails, and photographs I had secretly archived over the years, formed a damning narrative. Every deceit, every slight, every attempt to manipulate me, every cruel favor they claimed to have done, all there in black and white. I smiled. Step 1, evidence. Step 2, exposure. Step 3, absolute moral and legal victory. I sent carefully worded anonymous tips to local business journalists, snippets of emails and conversations that revealed their duplicity without directly implicating myself. Within days, the first stories appeared online. Former business mogul family exposed for manipulation and greed. Scandal rocks local community, lies, loans, and betrayal. The public, as always, loved a downfall story. And yet, it was more than public humiliation. It was the quiet personal victory I relished in every day. No one would see me gloating. No one would witness my satisfaction. They would only feel the sting. The first phone call came from Daniel. He was frantic, voice shaking. "Maya? What's happening? People are talking. We're ruined." I took a deep breath, calm as the desert night outside my windows. "I told you, Daniel. I will always know what you do. You made your choices. Now live with them." He hung up before I could say more. I allowed myself a faint smile. Rachel called next. "Maya? Please? We didn't know." "Exactly," I interrupted softly. "You didn't know, you never knew. That's why you lost." And with that I disconnected. No pleading, no threats. The seeds I had planted years ago were bearing fruit. Their greed and arrogance had done this to themselves. But the true satisfaction came not from their despair but from the life I had built. Sentinel Shield was now an empire, untouchable and respected. Scholarships and programs I funded were changing lives daily, and the Louis Foundation, named for the grandfather who had believed in me when no one else would, was flourishing, helping foster children, adoptees, and those neglected by cruel families like mine had been. I set my hands on the photos of children in my programs, faces full of curiosity, hope, and bright futures. Unlike my parents, I gave love, attention, and opportunity freely, knowing exactly the difference it made. I had created a legacy that no greed, no betrayal, no darkness could touch. And still, I had one last private satisfaction. I funded mentorship programs anonymously, designed to give neglected children subtle advantages, the same advantages my parents had denied me. Little victories, quiet, invisible to the world, but monumental to those who received them. Weeks passed. Their attempts to regain footing were pitiful. Every contact they made, every scheme they hatched, only revealed more of their desperation. And I, always 3 steps ahead, anticipated each move, every single one. One night, as I sat on my balcony overlooking Scottsdale, a cryptic anonymous message appeared on my encrypted phone. "They won't stop. Are you ready?" I smiled, sipping tea, the desert wind warm against my skin. Ready? I had been ready for decades. Every slight, every humiliation, every betrayal was a note in the symphony of my revenge. And I conducted it with perfection. I looked at the horizon, golden and endless. My parents were a closed chapter, trapped in regret, powerless and morally bankrupt. I had nothing to fear from them ever again. My life, my family, my legacy, all mine, untouchable, righteous, untarnished. And in that quiet, victorious moment, I realized the truth I had always known. Revenge was only sweet when paired with justice and self-mastery. I had claimed both. The wind whispered through the desert. The stars blinked above. And I, Maya Torres, finally, fully and absolutely was free.